This is Karen from NewClevelandRadio.net, and it is time for the Intentionality Gurus with Candace Pollock. I don't even have Candace's picture up. We just have her name, but it is Candace behind the black curtain. Um, and today we are going to continue on the grief recovery method. And the subject today is completing the incomplete. So, are we ever finished completing anything?
Well, that's a interesting question. I mean, I think that can be debatable because in the context of grief, we can have a lot of aspects of an event where we feel a loss or some disconnect with some relationship without it being entirely complete. Particularly, say, in situations where an adult child has estranged themselves from their parents, and every birthday and anniversary, or this or that kind of event holiday can trigger those emotions anew.
Right.
But there's a grief recovery method process in order to be able to deal with those situations that we'll address today.
Okay.
So what I wanted to do is just, somewhat briefly review the steps we took, because it occurred to me, to somebody who's not familiar with the process, that many of these things may seem the same. But what we've learned so far over the course of these last weeks is that, the grief recovery method is a formal process of dealing with grief. And grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern or behavior. So it's not just related to deaths, although obviously that's, a big portion of it. Could be a promotion where we, love that part, but we also, regret having to leave friends behind or possibly move. Might have some conflicting feelings around maybe not being good enough in the new job and so on. And there are just a number of, it could be loss of a pet, it could be dealing with a family member who's dealing with a loss. And as I said, the estrangement when an adult child has estranged themselves, or when we estrange ourselves knowingly or less aware of it. And the idea is that our society, or few societies, I don't know of any society specifically that knows, is well prepared for dealing with grief. We have our societal influences and so on that we've talked about before. So this is where those myths come in, like, just suck it up, deal with it. Time will make it better. You can have another child. We'll get you another pet. A move is a good thing. Why don't complain. You should be happy. Here, have a cookie, and you'll feel better. All of those things. So that's the kind of socialization and patterns that can really set us up for lingering grief, where it colors our future losses, and we have all of these things kind of like a littered trail of unresolved emotions, and it can be pretty complicated.
Right.
So some of the things we learned were STIRBs. So if people remember from before, STIRBs is the acronym for short-term energy relieving behaviors. So when my husband died, I would go to work during the day. So, keep working, keep busy. That's one of my myths. And then I'd go home, I'd eat 2 Klondikes, brush my teeth always, and then binge watch Law and Order, the original series, I think maybe 6 times.
Wow.
And then I would, didn't sleep. I'd get up the next morning and repeat. And I did that for months and months and months and months and months. So that's not effective. All right. I can say that firsthand, but other people, and you mentioned some of the things that you experienced.
Right.
So the idea is for us to get, become aware of those patterns we use, because that handing somebody a cookie so that they, that we, in essence, don't deal with their pain, because it can be uncomfortable for us not to feel helpless in the face of other people's pain. I think about that building in Miami,
right,
and just how that calamity occurred, no warning, no chance of necessarily being able to escape and so on, and how many people must be grieving, including people just in the general community. So the idea is there's an element in these kinds of losses where we still have that emotional baggage attached to it, where something wasn't communicated, where we feel that we wish something had been different, better, or more. All right, so something that we didn't have a chance to say or wish we hadn't said, and so on.
Right.
We did a loss history graph, and that was basically our lifetime of losses from the dawn of our conscious memory to the present. And these would be the significant losses, and we represent that on a graph that shows the intensity of the loss in terms of how long the line is. And then we did a relationship graph. We picked one particular relationship. It could be with ourselves regarding, say, a promotion, or it could be with a boss or something. It could be regarding a person who has passed away. And then we identified the things that were good above the line, and we identified the things that were bad and emotionally for us below the line, again with the intensity, with represented by the length of the line.
Right.
And so then today we get into starting the completion part. All of this leads up to it, but the completion part, and it's two parts. So the first part is we review that relationship graph, and then we identify those events where we have some emotional incompleteness, those things that we wish were different, better, or more. And then we identify the things where we need to apologize to that other person. I'm going to assume it's a death relationship that we're completing. Something that we need to apologize for, something that we didn't say, or something we did say we wish we hadn't. The classic example is of a little child who's mad at their parent, says, "Oh, I wish you would die," and then the parent
Right.
dies, that kind of a thing. But that's an extreme and not necessarily a very common scenario. And so one that I have is with my great aunt, who for all intents and purposes is like a grandparent, and she was in a nursing facility, and I had worked really a long day, 2 different jobs as a lifeguard, and I was more or less kind of like a wet noodle when I got home, and I wanted to go down to the facility in town, but it would have taken about 20-25 minutes. And I fell asleep on the couch, and I just always felt really guilty because I knew that she was relying on me for the company while I was home for the summer.
Got it.
All right, so that would be one of those situations. So we identify the things that we can apologize for, and an apology is something that we did or failed to do that might have hurt the other person. And then we identify things where we need to forgive someone else or even ourselves. So, and forgiveness is basically giving up the hope that it'd be different, and not blaming. And then we look for things that have some significant emotional statement, excuse me. So this is something that doesn't fall into apologies or forgiveness, but there's a lot of emotion around it. All right. And we just identify those things. We take that list of things, and then we put together this thing that the grief recovery method calls a completion letter, a grief recovery completion letter. So what do you think that might be?
Well, I would think it's some sort of a journaling of those thoughts that you're going through, that you sort of are going to, I don't want to say bury, but to some degree bury them, and just keep the good memories around you.
Yeah, so it's in that neighborhood. So the idea is we take the things we need to apologize for, the things that we're forgiving, and the things that otherwise have some significant emotional statement, and we put it together in a format that the grief recovery method has outlined. So it's not just a letter. It starts out a specific way. We get into the meat of the letter, and then we conclude it in a specific way. And we're writing all of that out, and that helps bring up those emotions. We deal with it. We can recognize them in the context of everything else we've learned in the program, and we can take responsibility for the parts where we are responsible and not blame the other person. It's all non-judgmental. And we will never share this letter with the person, assuming they're still alive, or even with anyone else except our partner in the grief recovery program. So if we're not doing it with a specific person, if we're just doing it from the handbook, which, you know, some people do,
Right.
then we would read it to ourselves, say in front of a mirror or something, but not necessarily share it with somebody who doesn't understand how to be the listener, how to be on the other end.
Okay.
But if we're in the program, then we share that communication that was never made in this cogent, organized way. And it starts to close the loop on those things that didn't get said. Right. And I
Okay.
can't begin to tell you what it's just such a, you know, seemingly simple process, but it's a very powerful process. And again, I'll reiterate that the grief recovery method is the only peer-reviewed evidence-based program that is proven to be effective. Like 4 out of 5 people, 4.5 out of 5 people, or a little more than 4.5 out of 5 people get, you know, really huge results from it. So we complete the letter, we read the letter, and then the other person listens. And that part is really an essential ingredient. It would be like leaving the eggs out of a cake mix. We have to have that part, or the baking soda out of it, you know, if we needed something to rise, for people who understand that reference. And with cake mixes, who knows anymore. But the idea is that both partners in that experience have specific training on how to do it. And then that whole process allows us to return to a full range of emotions regarding that particular loss or that relationship. So what occurs to you when you hear me say this?
Well, you know, I haven't followed the exact format, but,
Yeah, sure.
you know, I know when my father passed away, um, I I journaled it, and I was feeling a little bit angry at the time because my mother didn't want us to come visit him the last 2 months of his life. Um, you know, she made excuses, but I was angry. It was like, well, why can't I drive 3 hours and come sit by his side for a day and whatever? And she kept saying, you can call him every day. And we talked every day up until his last day. Um, and I still felt incomplete. So I wrote this out and saying how angry I was with her. I eventually did share it with her though. So that's opposite of what you're talking about. Um, but I had to share it with her because I felt that I had to let her know um, that I wouldn't listen to her again if she ever did that to me
Mhm.
because she was taking something away from me. And when she was ill and I moved in with her, you know, she kept telling me I should go home, and I kept reminding her, "You're not going to tell me what to do." Um, but I did feel that it helped me by writing it out, and I read it over numerous times before I shared it with her.
Yeah, and you know, you're entitled to do what you want in terms of your relationship, but just from the grief recovery method process, it's not their particular formula. So
Right.
I'm not saying you shouldn't have done that. It's just that they know by the mere preparation, following this process, and it evolved over time, but following this process, it's designed to complete the stuff that we didn't get to acknowledge,
Right.
probably even in our own hearts, until we sit down to do it. And yes, it can be painful, you know. So the whole reason I wanted to share this information was to kind of dispel some of the myths about grief, and also to raise awareness about all of the forms of grief that we don't give any, you know, acknowledgement to, you know, with the COVID confinement and the fear regarding, you know, whether somebody would get it, or, what the result would be, and possibly about the vaccinations and so on. All of those things are rife for having grief associated with them. And, if particularly when we're isolated, home confinement and so on, it can be very, very limiting, very emotional, and we're stuffing that stuff. And, there's a book called The Body Keeps Score. So the idea is that, it's going to go someplace,
Right.
energy doesn't get destroyed, it just gets converted into some other form and so on. So the idea in sharing this is to let people know there is a formal resource. And I'm particularly focused on the estrangement part now, because I have so many clients in my day job who have adult children who have estranged themselves from their parents. And one couple in particular said until I had mentioned to them they were grieving, they didn't recognize they were grieving. And that just broke my heart, because there's the loss is still there, the pain is still there.
Right.
They can't change that relationship, but they can change some of their elements of how they relate to that loss. And if that gives them even a little bit of pain relief, I think it would be worth it.
It's interesting that you bring that up because I don't know if I've mentioned it here or not, but when my oldest son turned 11, um, I had custody of him. And he would go to visit his father down in Cincinnati every couple weeks. And one of those weekends that he went down to visit his father, um, he came back telling me that he had made a decision. He was going to move to live with his father because in the state of Ohio, all you have to do is be 11 years old and go before a judge and ask for a change, and the judge typically grants it. Um, and I started grieving right away. I didn't know that's what I was doing, but looking back, I realized that he did eventually go to live with his dad. Um, and, you know, people were not kind about it, but I wasn't kind to myself either. I found every reason to blame myself why he, had moved, um, and suffered more than I had to suffer until I found a group, and I don't know even know if they still have these anymore, but it's called um, Mothers with Lost Children. And it could either be being estranged from your child or your child going to live with another parent or going to live with a grandparent. And once I realized other people were going through something similar to me, um, I finally could let my guard down and cry and process and actually start to heal. And it was when I started healing is when my son was old enough to say, "Hey, I want to see my mother more often." Um, and I think part of that was he saw that I became a different person as well. I got stronger because I allowed myself to grieve and get through it.
Yeah,
So,
and it's on the range of our emotions. And I always liken it to piano keys, that you get to play the full range of the keys on the piano, not just the low end or the high end. And it's natural, and anything where we're sublimating those emotions is going to be that area where we have that deep pain, and as you say, suffer more than you have to.
so, if somebody was looking to get assistance through this grief recovery, how would they go about it? I mean, we know
So,
you're talking about it. We know that you're um, trained in it, but let's say they live in Texas. How would they find somebody?
well, people that are certified in the grief recovery method are international. They're all over the world, and they can go to the website, thegriefrecoverymethod.com, and there is a link towards the very bottom. You have to scroll down to the very bottom of the landing page, and there's a section where you can find a specialist. And now that they're allowing the program to be done in person because it was peer reviewed and they were only allowing it to be done, sorry, now that they're allowing it to be done online. Now, previously they were only allowing it to be done in person because that's what the peer review was. Finally, they were satisfied they could deliver the same quality and standards online that as they could in person. And so now you could be, a hermit, as long as you have an internet connection, a hermit someplace, and connect with a specialist, because they do have one-on-one programs where it's the individual, the griever, with the specialist. And soon they will be opening up the program to have online group programs. But with the COVID restrictions lifting, many are going back to the in-person programs as well, for people that prefer that kind of connection. So it's online, thegriefrecoverymethod.com, and you can find a specialist, other resources there. There's a blog, there's videos, lots of resources. And the other part is for resources for the unique losses. So that might be for a pet. There are books on the topics that they prepared, the original authors have prepared. I just finished getting certified for helping children with loss, and it's actually helping the adults deal with the children that are facing a loss, either a
Sure.
death or something else. And and that would be applicable, say, if there was some violence at school as well, those kinds of things. So it's a wonderful organization. I mean, it turned my life around 180 degrees after my husband died. And then I was able to apply it to other losses that, I had moved on, I thought, and didn't realize, oh, I have all of these that scar tissue that it's been impairing, actually impairing how I dealt with the loss of my husband. And that's the point, that we can have that littered trail of losses that we never quite dealt with, that then color us or callous us in terms of how we deal with later losses.
Well,
So,
that certainly makes sense, because as I mentioned, I believe last time, um, when my grandmother died, I was 9 years old, and you know, I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral home. I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, but my family being Jewish and sitting shiva for 7 days, we went to my aunt's house, and my aunt lived in a big fancy house, and it looked like a party for 7 days. Um, and there was laughing and there was crying. And as a 9 year old, I totally didn't understand it. It was like,
yeah, how
how,
confusing would that be?
right. And why are we having a party? Because, my grandmother just died. And, you know, like it made no sense to me. And I don't even think my parents really even tried to explain it to me back then. Um, and then 9 years later, when my grandfather died, um, again, my mother, made her decision that I shouldn't go to the funeral home. And um, you know, I could go to the cemetery because I wouldn't see my grandfather. He was in this wooden casket. And that scared me even more. Here I am, 18 years old and sad, and didn't use the word grief, just used the word sad at the time. And I just see this box being lowered into the ground. And again, going back to my aunt's house, and again, it looked like a big party for a week. And it was at that point I sat my father down and I said, "Why haven't you ever explained any of this to me? And what are you shielding me from?" And he just looked at me and he said, "We shouldn't be." And I said, "But you have. You've done it twice that I know of in my life." And, um, he didn't have an answer for me. And
Well,
then,
and so much of it happens kind of automatically because
yeah,
it's how he was trained, probably, how what he saw, he's just following the pattern that others before him.
well, what is interesting is that he shared with me years later that when he was, I know he was more like 7 or 8 years old, um, his grandmother died. And back in the day, um, instead of going to a funeral home, the body would be in your home, and they would prepare the body in the home. And um, before they took her to the cemetery, his parents made him kiss his grandmother in the casket.
Mm,
And you know, he finally said to me, you know, I think maybe that's why I shielded you, because it was a very uncomfortable experience for me to have to do that. And I thought about it and it was like, yeah. And my
right.
mother
Talk
never,
about conflicting feelings.
right. And my mother never talked to me about anything like that. But, you know, maybe she went through it herself as well. I don't know. But, you know, I think that this program, as we've been talking about it, is so important because there are so many things that we grieve about, even on a daily basis, even if it's short term, and they can come back and haunt us.
Exactly. And, it's consistent with the whole theme with the intentionality gurus. It's just revealing that hidden iceberg of stuff that can, dramatically impact how we think, behave, act, and feel. And it's just, just by noticing, we have an opportunity to relate to it differently. We can continue to relate to it the way we've always done it, but just with some insight and some specific trainings, particularly something that's been peer reviewed and so on, we can maybe look at another path, another way to deal with it, and be more effective in our relationship with people, but also model that for others in our family. And it's not for that purpose necessarily, but just to be better grievers and
Yep.
feel that whole piano key set, and not deny those parts of us.
Well, I'm glad that you um, found this and that you will be working in this field, because it's absolutely important. And we will put the link to the organization in the show notes. And if anybody has questions, you can always go to Candace's Facebook page and leave a message, or go to the website, and we will get back to you with the answers that hopefully you're looking for.
Well, thank you for having this venue that we can share that, Karen. I really
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
We will all see you again in about 2 weeks. Have a great day.
All right, take care.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye.